Okay, so this is going to be a video about atheism. But before we get there, I want to talk about antinatalism a little bit more. So every time you read about antinatalism, you end up with this classification or category of antinatalism called environmental antinatalism. And I don't think it takes a genius to figure out what that is. And I think even without being antinatalist, you could be an environmentalist in the sense of looking at the way human beings affect the environment and the way animals affect the environment, et cetera, et cetera. So it doesn't, I'm not saying that if you're an environmentalist, you automatically think that misanthropic antinatalism is the way to go. Like you could be an environmentalist and consider that human beings are part of the ecosystem in a very natural way, which we are, but in a way that allows us to fit in more congruently or more in harmony with the environment. And that's a beautiful thought. That is actually an ideal worth shooting for. I mean, I don't think antinatalism is very practical from a human standpoint. And I think a New Yorker article that David Benatar was interviewed in actually points out that he is very pessimistic when it comes to the adoption of antinatalism across the globe, and um, maybe even in different nations and different regions, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a philosophy that people won't adopt. Like I said, there's lots of things that people can do that we don't do. And I think maybe antinatalism cuts this very mortal or fatal kind of you know uh, self uh, self annihilating kind of cloth that a lot of people just wouldn't go for. But you get the point. When I argue for antinatalism, though, I'm never actually arguing from the standpoint of how how impactful we are when it comes to anthropogenic climate change. I'm actually arguing from the perspective that it is within every human being to suffer, and I think those are feelings that don't go away, no matter how much you think them away or how much you try to live a happy life. Externally, if you think about economics and basically the minimum levels at which people are happy when it comes to money, et cetera, et cetera, you'd think that those types of things. I kind of lost my train of thought there, but maybe I'm rambling too much. But I think it doesn't matter what your socioeconomic status is, and maybe even similar benchmarks when it comes to human happiness, the geographical region you're in, et cetera, et cetera. I'm never arguing that those things don't make a difference, but what I'm saying is the suffering that people do endure throughout their lives in any context, and people do suffer to varying degrees, but I'm saying even within, say, wealthy nations, for instance, people suffer. It's just part of the fabric of life, and that's how people are. Um, and eliminating suffering, I think, is actually eliminating what it is to be human. And I've said this in previous videos. I think there's a transhumanist approach to eliminating suffering, and maybe I don't know. Maybe there is no other way of eliminating suffering except to kind of alter what it is to be human in the present form. Um, Anyway, like I said, just reiterating, I don't think antinatalism is very pragmatic. I don't think it's a pragmatist point of view, as maybe say Jordan Peterson might espouse. Um, but I don't want to say I regret. What's the word? I don't think I will ever give up the notion or the understanding that life is suffering, and I think there's an asymmetry there that is just fact. Um, anyway, so on to the atheist thing, and maybe the atheism thing is going to take up less time, but yeah, I gotta get this guy's name. So this guy just won the Templeton Prize, which is an annual prize, which is exceeds the Nobel Prize in terms of money. Let me just get this. Okay, so his name is he's a Brazilian, if that makes a difference, and his name is Marcelo Gleiser. Gleiser, I don't know. So he's one of those guys that won the Templeton Prize, which is a prize that deals with the spiritual dimension of humanity, of existence. And in the article's from phys.org. He's a cosmologist, by the way, but he tries to, what the article tries to do is basically try to show that this adversarial relationship between religion and science isn't necessarily true. Um, so, are there scientists that are religious? Yes. I mean, I can't name one, but I'm sure they exist. I mean, you think about what that U.S. presidential candidate in 2016, I forget his name, but he's a surgeon and he believes in creationism. He doesn't believe in evolution, which is kind of weird. Um, but I guess what I want to say is that the angle with which I want to attack this is basically, and it was brought up in the article as well, is basically the idea that God can't be disproven, but he also can't be proven. So the point is, um, y there are so many possibilities open to whatever might exist out there. Like there are so many things that we just can't prove don't exist. And when you start talking about, like, when people say things like God is love and God is everything and everything is God and love is everything, like, you're just shooting words back and forth. You're not actually proving anything. And I think a really important point is when you start discussions about God or whatever else you want to talk about, it's a very unscientific way of talking about anything. There is no evidence, none whatsoever, and you just can't just prove something exists because there's no proof it doesn't exist. Like, I mean, it doesn't work out that way. I'm not a scientist. I mean, I'm not Marcelo Gleiser or whatever his name is. I mean, I'm not a cosmologist, but whatever. I mean, but to me, in a very logical fashion, in a very reasoned fashion, I just don't see how you could say that something can't be disproven, so it must mean that it's true. Like, I mean, uh, it doesn't seem to work out. And by the time you get to, like, interreligious or interfaith communications or talk about, the similarities between religion, et cetera, et cetera, like, I mean, it still seems like you're ignoring large parts of sectarian divisions. Like, there's major parts too that you just keep kind of forgetting. Um, and if you want to move away from sectarian divisions, because for whatever reason you want to move away from those discussions, because, I mean, your belief is just as validated as anybody else's belief, because you both are believing in the same way. Like, and so anyway, forgetting all of that, I mean, you know, by saying that there's a God, but there's no agreement on what God is, you're essentially saying that you're essentially saying that you can't tell what the nature of God is. And I've read that before in some philosophical article or something, but we cannot know what God is. Like, if such a thing existed, we just don't. There's no way of knowing. So, I mean, you just have to kind of wipe the slate clean. You just kind of have to, you cannot know what God is. Like, we just can't. Like, and any sort of universalist approach to it just doesn't, like, and already saying that there's no science involved. I mean, there's there's nothing. You can't say what the prime mover is. You can't tell what it is morally, what it is morally or ethically. You can't tell what it is from a material sense or an immaterial sense. Like, you just can't say. Um, are science and religion opposed? I've heard one person, I forget his name, but he was on the Waking Up podcast. I've heard him say that you could think of the whole science religion thing as compartments in somebody's mind, so that you're either in one mode or the next. But even then, I think there's an even the fact that there is that divide, you'd think that there's even within your own head maybe um, some sort of battle for truth that goes on. Because if you're in one mode, it cancels out the other, and if you're in one, and vice versa. But yeah, so I don't. I think there's a fundamental kind of opposition that goes on there. That I think the only way to overcome is kind of ignorance, willful ignorance, and I think maybe that's kind of where things kind of settle for me. Um, and even with the method with which we engage with either one, religion or science, seems kind of, you know, opposed, maybe not in the same ring, but opposed just by mere methodology. So yeah. Anyway, that's all I gotta say. I mean, there's also this horrible thing that happened in New Zealand. I noticed that this one really made the rounds. I noticed a lot of usage of the word Islamophobia. I noticed a lot of, you know, talk about white supremacy, et cetera, et cetera. I don't want to say that white supremacy is a religion. I don't want to say that Islam is, just some mundane ideology. I think maybe I think maybe ideology is at play, and I think I don't think that this shooting in New Zealand was just some bout of rage or anything, and I think manifestos actually play a huge role in in these types of things, and they definitely point to something that is beyond just the individual. Um, anyway, that's all I want to say on that. I mean, it's just horrible. It's really horrible, and I think these identity things that people are continually dredging up and just holding up to the light in the U.S. and in Italy and in the UK. Like, I mean, I feel it like a really bad, and it's also almost always comes under the guise of unity, right? Like, I mean, you have identity, I have identity, let's identity together. But like, I mean, it is so not. Like, I mean, like just like holding up your identity, things that you inherited through genetics or whatever, or even religious identity, is just such a foundation for divide. Um, and I think it was Sam Harris. It could have been Richard Dawkins. I forget, but one of the four horsemen said that. Oh, I think it's definitely Sam Harris actually. But he said like, any peacefulness you can see in the world, um, most times involves secularism to a high degree. And while you can't say that secularism is the cause for whatever, like peace or happiness or anything like that, you can definitely see like a religious kind of influence when it comes to like some of the worst things that have ever happened in history. Anyway, I'm rambling on and I'm kind of losing myself in all these thoughts as well. But just the Islamophobia thing. I mean, I think there are hate laws in place, and I think Islamophobia does get kind of highlighted a little bit in the sense of calling identity again into a conversation, but it does divide. Once you start atomizing groups, you start dividing. Anyway, that's all. Bye.